You heard it here first. 107.1 WLJZ LP.
What's up, my good people? This is your girl, Miss Good News, and your boy,
Prez.
And we have your boy, Synphany of Synphanymedia, the multimedia director. And we're going to get into this. We got a special guest. Who we got, Prez?
The Chief Operating Officer and the Senior Vice President, Dr. Anthony J. Davis.
Now you can introduce yourself.
Hey, good morning, good morning, good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Anthony J. Davis, Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer. And hey, I'm just hanging out with you right here in this studio.
Yes,
sir.
WLJZ 107.1 FM, right here at Livingstone College. So I know the people are looking like, what do y'all have him here for? You know, so we got to get into it.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. You know, I'm the old man. Thank you for being, kind to the old man and inviting me to share with you and all of your listeners. Again, so glad to be here today. What's on your mind?
All right.
So, I know a little bit of your story because you're such a great keynote speaker and just a great speaker in general. Having the opportunity to record and do a lot of things, outside and Livingstone related work with you. Can you kind of just tell people your story, who you are, and like a time where you remember where you were the happiest?
Wow, time when I remember I was the happiest. Well, I think that my story, I have to just share my entire story. And then, my life, when I look back over my life, I'm happy at where I ended up, where I landed. But sometimes people look at where you land and they have a blatant disregard for your launch. And then they give you titles and tags. And I always say, it's not what you call me. It's not what you call me. It's what I answer to. So
That's right.
I've been given tags, but I always tell my story. I come from very, very humble beginnings, and I like to share my story because I believe that my story can be liberating to some young man, some young woman who's trapped in the foster care system.
Right.
People who are listening to me today, people who look at me, they don't realize that I was about 90 days away from emancipation. If you don't know what emancipation is, that's when you reach that ripe old age of 18 when you're in the foster care system, where you're now released with no resources. I wrote a paper years ago called the garbage bag syndrome, because if you didn't have suitcases when you left, and young people who've been in foster care know when they transport you from house to house, what they do is they pack your items up in a garbage bag. And so metaphorically, when you think about that, you think about where you are today and what you escaped. But for me, October 26, 1965. I'm born in New Haven, Connecticut.
Hold on, don't give too much yet. Hold on, we got because you got a lot. You got a lot of gems to drop.
All right.
So we want you to tell us, because we want to kind of walk them through this and not give it all at one time, and we want to deliver it in a way that they can understand. So
you want the happiest day in my life?
The happiest, what was the happiest moment for you as a child? Can you remember one of the happiest moments for you?
1976. I wanted a train set. So, you had Lionel trains, and Tyco had come out with this brand new train set called the Spirit of 76. It had the presidential seal on it.
Wow.
And that's what I wanted for Christmas. I wanted that. That Christmas, I was blessed with two gifts. Not only did I get the Spirit of 76 train, I also had a Huffy motocross bicycle. I'm taking y'all back. That was the trick bike back then. So, that was the happiest Christmas for the young man.
Wow. And how old were you?
So I don't want to tell my age, but in 1976, I was 11 years old.
Okay.
11 years old.
Wow.
I remember that.
Wow. Okay. So we wanted to do that because sometimes they gonna get it. They gonna get the story. We don't want to just give it to them like that. We want to start off nice, and then you gonna give it all to them. However it goes.
Hey, you lead this conversation. I'm here to follow. I know how to follow. So you lead this dance.
So so the next thing would be, everybody kind of relates family as the foundation of a person. So if you think about the foundation of a person, you say, I have my family, and this and that, mother and father, thinking of a family. That's the idea. But for you grew up without your mother and your father, and you grew up in foster care. So what would you say was your foundation growing up? Because you can remember your happiest day, but I'm pretty sure that there were days that weren't so happy. What would you say was your foundation and just kept you grounded?
unlike many young men and young women who find themselves trapped in the foster care system, and I say trapped because oftentimes you are trapped, but I was blessed. I was placed in a foster home with 2 elderly parents, so I can't say I didn't have a mother and a father. I did not know my biological mom or my biological father, but my foster mother and my foster father, they gave me sanctuary, security, and safety, and that was part of my growth and development.
Wow. So like you said, your biological mother and father, they weren't there. So can you take us back to the entrance of your world, of you coming into this world? Because no one really remembers like when they were born. If you do, please DM us right now. But it's usually the story. So tell us your story of how you entered into the world.
Well,
now you can give
my story is documented. October 26, 1965. My mother was 13 years old. Imagine being a teenage girl pregnant in 1965. You're 13. I was my mother's 14th birthday present. Think about it. She turns 14. 7 days later, I'm born. I was her birthday present. Born a couple months premature. But the tragedy struck the night I was born. The reason why I was mandated as a ward of a state was because on the night that I was born, my mother's mother died. So my mother became a mother and motherless in the same 24-hour period. So what happens is, we're both wards of the state, a teenage girl, 14, and a brand new baby. And no one wanted to take a mother and child in foster care because back then in Connecticut, the rule was, hey, if you were a teenage girl and you had a baby, whatever foster home took you, they had to take both of you, and they gave you no additional resources. So no one wanted to take me. So they found this elderly woman, 9 Admiral Street, New Haven, Connecticut. Her name was Louise Moore, had no children of her own, but had a reputation for being one of the best. When you talk about Brady being the greatest of all time, and LeBron, she was the greatest of all time as it relates to foster care parents because she had raised boys in foster care. But she was elderly. And they came to her and said, Louise, that was her name, Miss Moore, would you take this baby? This little fella has nowhere to go. It's tragic. She said, I'm too old to take another baby. And she said, my family, they said, I'm too sick to take another child. They said, keep him for a weekend. Keep him for a weekend. And that'll give us some time to see what we can do. She kept me for a weekend, like a puppy, right? Keep him for a weekend. And after she kept me for a weekend, when they came to get me, she told them, don't even get out your car. God told me I have to keep this one. And so she raised me from the time I was 2 months old until the time I was emancipated from the system.
Wow, that's deep. So could you kind of give clarity on foster care, because so people can understand how, because it's easy to think that, okay, you had a foster mother and a father, so you should have been okay, but how does that work? Do you go and stay with her and never go back to like the group home? I know like some people go back and forth, you know what I'm saying? So you go stay with your foster parents on the weekend or maybe every other week, and then you go back home and you just go back and forth. And then I know some foster parents usually or sometimes adopt the child. So how does that work? Like, so we can understand, how does that work?
How to work. So when you're in foster care, you're a ward of the state. In other words, the state steps in and says, for you to be with your biological family, right, it creates an unsafe environment. Now we can debate that what's unsafe, because when you think about foster care, you can hear about many of the tragedies that happen while young men and women are in the system. Again, I was blessed. I stayed in one home for 17 years. But think about this. I spent 17 years, 9 months in the system, and I can only remember seeing or having interaction with a social worker twice in my entire stay. And that's being very generous. I'm thinking about the 2 times that I had an opportunity to have a conversation with a social worker. So I could have been in a home where I was abused. I could have been in a home where I was being neglected. Thank God, God had another plan, but that wasn't my case. Adoption was on the table at one point, but remember, I had an elderly foster parent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Close to 70 when I'm 11 years old. So think about how old they were.
Right.
Yeah.
They wanted to adopt, but here was the tragedy. Back then, if they adopted me, guess what? All of the resources would have been gone. I tell everyone that I grew up on public assistance on a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Yeah, I grew up on food stamps, government cheese, you know, the cereal that came in the box that just said cereal. I mean, those are my humble beginnings. And I remember that. But the life lessons I learned at 9 Admiral Street helped develop and make me who I am today.
Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot. And it doesn't take away, having a foster parent doesn't take away from the fact that your story started the way that it did, because not to be connected to your biological parents, thank God for people who step in.
Yeah.
And, you know, because I have a mother who is a foster parent, and then she actually adopted children. But thank
Shout
God
out
for
to
those.
your mom. Shout out to your mom.
Yeah, it takes a lot.
Hey.
And like you said, once you get adopted, a lot of resources stop. You don't get that. And so, and I understand, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the connection with your biological mother and father was missing.
Right.
So how did you get to a point to where you got reconnected, or did you reconnect?
Yeah, we did. We did. When I was 24 years of age, so I moved back. So graduate high school, went into, you know, I told you I emancipated myself, went into the United States Armed Forces, did 6 years in the military. I come back to, you know, my hometown, New Haven, Connecticut. I was a club DJ. Shout out to my son, DJ Trails. Learned everything he knows through his dad through DNA transfer. So shout out to my son, DJ Trails. But during that time period, there was a hunger because I wanted to know who I was. And while my foster mother was alive, that wasn't something that I wanted to, you know, I didn't really want to explore and learn about that. But then when she died, I had a void, and I wanted to know who I was. I mean, who, you know, tell me about my family. I wanted to know that. And so what happened was, one of my foster brothers had his biological brother, who just so happened to be friends with my mother.
Wow.
And one day, you know, he comes, I was working at a pharmacy part-time. He came to the pharmacy and said, tomorrow we're going to go to church and you're going to meet your mother. I'm saying to myself, I'm 24 years old. You know, back then all I had was club clothes. I didn't have church clothes. So I put together a suit. You know, I found a black pair of pants, a tweed jacket, black tie, white shirt, black shoes. I remember it as if it were yesterday. And I went and I sat in Bethel AME Church, New Haven, Connecticut. And I sat there for an entire worship service, looking in the back for someone to walk in to finally meet my mother. For the first time, they said in about 3 years, she missed a Sunday at church. She's a avid churchgoer. For the first time in 3 years, she missed church. So I'm riding around the community with my best friend, who was my business partner, because we would set up and do our own club thing, and people were coming. So we were unpacking equipment. Mondays was our day to reconcile the business, reconcile the money, and we're riding around. And I tell him, hey, yesterday I went to church because I wanted to meet my mother. And he says, wow. He said, where is she? I said, she works at Hill House High School. I know I'm taking the scenic route, but I want you to picture this in your mind. She works at Hill House High School. And I said, well, I'm not just going to walk in. They said, yeah, our former gym teacher. He said, our former gym teacher is the principal. I said, the principal? They said, yeah, why don't you just go? And as soon as I walk in the building, here's this tall sisters with, I want to say 3.5-4-inch stilettos walking down the hill, yelling, walking down the hallway, yelling, telling kids, get to class, get to class. She looks at me and does a double take. I looked at her. Remember now, we're only 11 years, I mean, we're only 14 years apart. So she's looking at me, I look at her, you know, I wave, and then I meet my gym teacher. He looks at me and said, man, you're looking good. What you doing? He brings me in the conference room and I unpack the story. Tell him, hey, I'm trying to find my mother. And I told him the story. He looked at me and he said, man, you better be telling, I hope this is no scam.
Wow.
He said, because I know the person you're talking about. And I'm going to go see if this story is true. Because if not, you're going to have a problem, because this is not funny. This is a joke.
Right.
Right.
So I sat there, and the door opens, and the same lady that walked down the hall and did the double take came in the conference room, and he said, "Meet your mother." That was the first time. Now, we had seen each other earlier, because I can remember her coming to the foster home at least twice while I was, in care. And for whatever reason, our meeting was on the front porch. The house had a front porch.
Okay.
And we, met at the front door. And I remember that she was tall, slender, and chocolate. That's what I remember.
Wow.
And so when she walked down the hallway, here she was again, tall, slender, chocolate, but an adult version of what I envisioned before. But we both made eye contact.
Right.
And it was a chemistry. We knew something was there, because she looked at me, I looked at her.
Right.
But that was my mom.
Wow.
Man. Boy, I'm this is a movie. I mean, like, this is a movie, and it's amazing how God orchestrates things to come together.
Yeah. I say only God, I believe I think it was Rick Warren, Purpose Driven Life, when he talks about what are you on earth for. I always say that God's plan always prevails. And sometimes when I unpack my story, I recognize that what God was saying was, I need the DNA of a Wanda Davis and a Tyrone Deans to be what I need you to be down the road.
Right.
But I need your software to come from 9 Admiral Street.
Yeah.
And so God said, hey, I'm going to birth you here, because I need this, I need
amazing.
the characteristics from these two for you to be who you are. But then I need your software package to come from here. It's almost like I need your hardware to come from Apple, but I need your software to come from Microsoft.
That's deep.
Yeah.
That's deep. That's a good way to look at it. It's perception, perspective. Like,
yeah, definitely.
Like, a lot of children don't have it. If you don't have that, and you start off with, because that could be traumatizing, to not to have your biological family, and then to be blessed with a good family. I just know by experience that when you get older, you want to know, like you say, you have a void, especially if the foster parent passes away, or you just get older and get curious, like, okay, I want to know my DNA. Where I want to, go back and check on that. And so you were able to connect with your mom.
Yeah.
Were you ever able to connect with your father?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And so when I talk about I always say that part 1 of my life, God needed Louise Moore and Robert Moore to get me from part 1 of my life. But then when my mom stepped in, she stepped in at part 2 of my life. Trust me, I wouldn't have probably never gone back to college to get my bachelor's degree if it had not been for my mom. Wanda Gibbs, New Haven, Connecticut. Shout out, Mom. I'm sure you'll hear this at one point. I would have never accepted my call ministry. I mean, I'm ordained clergy, Amy Zion Church, the same church that my foster mother took me to be baptized at 2 months old. I ended up preaching my trial sermon there.
Wow.
Years later.
That's major.
It's all part of God's plan.
Wow.
But the education side, it was Wanda Gibbs, New Haven, Connecticut, who said, you have so much to offer. Make sure you go back to school. And it was like, hey, she picked up where she left off. And I always say, and I said this to someone recently, I've seen the best relay teams, all right, lose relay races because they don't know how to pass the baton. And I believe that the baton was passed from Louise Moore to Wanda Gibbs, and she was able to catch the baton and pick up, as far as my development goes, where Louise Moore left off. And I always say that development comes before deployment. I could not be deployed to do the things that I do today if I didn't have the perspective of my rearing at 9 Admiral Street and the reinforcement in rearing coming from Wanda Gibbs when I met her at 24.
Yeah.
Man, that's beautiful. Yeah, you're gonna help a lot of people, I believe, with that testimony, because you have to look at things a certain way to be able to move forward. And so, what was your first conversation with your mom? What was that like?
That is where the first day 1 conversation 1. tears in the eyes. After the tears, she talked about, wow, I remember not too long ago, I was trying to find you. I tracked you up until 1983.
Wow.
And I found you. And then when I found you, I lost you again. I lost you because you went into the United States Armed Forces. And when you went into the Armed Forces, there was a trigger that happened in the 80s. They stopped using serial numbers, and everyone's identifier was your Social Security number.
Right.
And because she didn't know my Social Security number, it was very hard to track me.
Wow.
And so she said her closest family member told her, don't worry, one day he's going to find you.
Yeah.
And sure enough, here I was.
Wow.
Real time.
Man.
So what was it like for you being in the armed forces?
Well, I can tell you that for me, the armed forces was my means of escape. It was my means of emancipation. So here I am, 17 years old. I apply, I take the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, hashtag ASVAB. I scored so high the first time I took it, they asked me to come back and take it again.
Wow.
Because a young African-American male from the hood with no college normally didn't score as high in the area of math and science as I did. So, that's why I'm a numbers guy. That's why I'm always talking, numbers, digits, and everything. That's me, right?
Right.
And I took it again, and they told me, you have an unusual aptitude, and we're going to let you take another test. They let me take another test that I didn't pass, right? It was a test that would have allowed me to bypass the enlisting ranks and go to officer candidate school. I'm 17 years old. So the day I took the test, I wasn't focused. I think I wanted to get back home to the hood, play baseball, play basketball. I can't remember.
Right.
But they told me, well, you didn't pass that test, but you do qualify for some of the best career fields that the Air Force has to offer.
Wow.
So they talked to me about a career field in the biological sciences. I can remember my AFSC code. That's the code that every job in the Air Force has. I was a 92470. That means, I was a medical laboratory specialist. So after basic training, I had almost 2 years of school and training. So much so that when I finished, I only had a few credits that I needed to obtain an associate's degree.
Right.
And so the military for me was, an opportunity for me to develop a career. And I walked out of the military after 6 years into a real good career field. But while I was in the military, I learned the craft. I knew how to DJ. I worked at the civilian hospital downtown because I had a skill. I was a lab tech, and I could work in chemistry, urinalysis, blood bank.
Right.
I was that guy, right? They didn't mind.
Wow.
But also, one thing they always tell, back then, 100 pounds ago, I was Air Force Honor Guard.
Okay.
The slim guys that carry the flag, and so it was a special duty assignment. I had made it all the way up to Washington, D.C., where, my path would have been derailed, but my application was kicked back, went all the way up to headquarters, but it kicked it back. Why? Because that is when the AIDS crisis happened, and no one wanted to handle blood products anymore. So headquarters said, oh, he's good, but we can't release him out of that job. So that's why I wasn't in Washington working at Arlington National Cemetery doing Air Force Honor Guard as a career. So,
and you needed to be here.
Yeah, I guess so. Like I said, God's plan always prevails.
Definitely.
That would have derailed God's plan.
Right.
And so that was my time in the military. But I was a very good DJ, though. That's when I learned how to, get on those Technique 1200 turntables. That's where I bought my first pair and learned how to master the mix.
Wow, that's amazing.
I remember there's a spot in Raleigh that you said you used to DJ at every weekend when y'all were on in bass, right?
It was not in Raleigh. I had the contract for 3 bases. So I was an entrepreneur. So I had a contract for Seymour Johnson Air Force Base and Pope Air Force Base. So every weekend I was on the road, making people have a good time, helping people have a good time through my mixes and my music.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, what's amazing to me, because I know I keep saying it, but what's amazing to me is that in this setting, the cards you were dealt, for you to be able to, and I hope that people really listen to what you said, the way that you're looking at it and saying like, okay, I needed this development to be able to deploy this. Like the way that you're looking at it, if more people could see things that way, even people who didn't go through foster care, if they could see things that way and understand that everything that's hard, like all your hardships are not always there to break you, but those are the very things that can help you become a better
Most
you.
definitely.
And you've just taken all of this where some people would have broke. You wouldn't have been able to handle it, you know, or made excuses, or, you know, woe is me. And it's a sad thing, it is, but you've made the best of it to come all the way to where you are now.
Look, I have a quote, and you know, I'm not on social media and I'm not tweeting, but if I were, I would tell you that trauma is training for the triumph and the testimony.
That's
Trauma.
it. That's good, right?
Yeah.
It's the training for the triumph and the testimony.
Yes.
Because you can't appreciate the triumph
Right.
unless you've had some pain and some losses in your life. And it's like playing spades. I love to play spades. What makes spades so good to play is the trash talk.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, the hand that you're dealt.
Right. Right.
I want to say that I can be dealt a bad hand, but I could talk enough trash to make you think that I'm going to win.
Wow.
That's all that matters.
And if I do that, you just might make the mistake
That's right.
where I'll
Folding.
set you.
Yeah,
Right.
playing too early.
So that's how I live life. I've been
Man.
counted out in many a day, but I tell people don't count me out because me and God, or God and I, are a majority. If God is for you, He's more than the whole world against you, and that has been evident in my life.
That has been evident in your life. You're right.
Yeah.
We are overcome by our testimony. Your testimony tells a lot just about who you are and how impactful God is in your life. And so, stay humble, people. Stay humble. Continue to get the meaning out of your testimony.
I've never been the favorite, but I've always had God's favor. That's the difference.
Yeah, you're
Might
right.
not have been the favorite, but I've always had God's favor.
Yeah, I want His favor. I don't have to be the favorite. Just give me
Favor's
His
not fair,
favor.
but it is final.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm giving you all these nuggets, right? Favor's not fair, but it is final.
I'll take that. So listen, we are going to first. Let me ask you this: if there's anybody's watching that is going through foster care right now in this moment, and they are not dealing with it so well, because I'm pretty sure you maybe had your days of like just I just don't understand, or I don't know. What would you say to them right now? Because they're juggling school, and you know, sometimes we can overlook children and act as if they don't have problems, but some people do. They really are dealing with things mentally, emotionally. What would you tell them right now if they're listening to you and you just made their day? Like, okay, I could do this. What would you tell them to do, or what would you tell them to think about to continue to get through it?
Stay on their grind. Don't give up. Stay on your grind. Don't give up. Because the moment you give up, you become that stereotype that everyone says that we are. Think about this.
Right.
They say that only 3% of young men and women who are in foster care, who are emancipated, go off to college.
What, 3%?
Only 1%
Yeah.
graduate from college.
Wow.
They don't even track us as it relates to who gets a master's or an earned doctorate. So listening to me today, you're looking at someone who was 90 days away from emancipation, went off to college. Not only did I get my bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree and an earned doctorate.
Yeah.
Got to stay on your grind.
Whew. And we gonna get in that in part 2, because he can't tell you about that yet. Y'all have to come back to WLJZ 107.1 on YouTube so you can get the second part, because like he said, it's 2 parts to every story. And so he had his beginning where he was developed and then deployed into all of this greatness. So make sure y'all stay tuned for part 2. That's all I can say. What you got to say, Prez?
That's it. See you in part 2.
See you in part 2.
All right. Thank you for having me today, where I get an opportunity to share my story. And I'm hoping that my story has been a blessing to someone that was listening.
Definitely.
And remember, the trauma
Yeah.
is the training for the triumph and the testimony.
You heard it.
Peace.